Hi, and welcome to the Citationist Group presentation for Sociology 270. The research question for our group this semester asked, what is the impact of an unconventional household on a child's academic success? This presentation will start with a little bit of background on the topic, followed by our methods for collecting data. Then we'll go over 4 different hypotheses and their results, and then we'll wrap up with an overall conclusion from those results, and then elaborate on any shortcomings, limitations, and the direction that this research can take in the future. The purpose of our study was to see how a person's family structure growing up correlates with academic success. Prior research has shown that children raised in a more traditional married mother and father household generally have had better academic and employment outcomes in life. However, through our research, we discovered that much of the research in this area is in some cases years or even decades old. So we felt it was necessary to gather more up-to-date data and see how it stands up to the older data. And so for our research, we wanted to find out from our survey participants what sort of household they grew up in and how academically successful they were. The construct of unconventional households were defined as either same-sex parents, single parents, adoptive parents, foster parents, a domestic partnership, or parents with a substance use disorder. And the construct of academic success was measured through GPA, grade retention, or being held back a grade, high school completion, and college admission.
We used a questionnaire as our method to collect data. We had a total of 23 questions consisting of demographic questions followed by family structure as well as academic questions. These included GPA scores, family structure growing up, history of substance abuse in the family, as well as the level of education completed. Our participants were 30 students from California State University of Long Beach, 11 were male, 17 female, and 2 did not disclose. Ages ranged from 18 to 49 with an average age of 22 years old. 53.3% of the participants were Hispanic, 20% were white, 10% were Asian, 10% were black, 6.7% did not disclose. Our materials used were our 23 question survey as well as our informed consent document. We recruited people online and had information gathered in person. Participants were given an informed consent document, then their survey. Our first hypothesis is children who experience divorce have an academic decline. The results of the first hypothesis are seen on the left. Here we have a clustered bar chart that shows how children dealt academically when facing particular stressors. We have results from children coming from traditional marriages, parents who are together but not married, same-sex parents, and single mothers. Data shows that those who were raised in a traditional household have a major decline compared to their peers when they experience divorce. Their grades drop to C's, D's, and F's. The data also shows that although they experience other stressors like separation, relocation, and death, they are able to obtain A's and B's as opposed to their peers.
Hypothesis 2. Children raised by same-sex parents are just as academically successful as their peers raised by opposite-sex parents. For the results of hypothesis 2, we have here a clustered bar chart on the left. The hypothesis was tested with the variables parental structure and academic success. Academic success was measured by the average K through 12 GPA, and then participants were asked what parental structure they grew up in. The most common parental structure was married male-female, followed by unmarried male-female, then single parent female, and then unmarried male-male and unmarried female-female parents. And according to this graph, the results appear to contradict the hypothesis. The graph shows that children from same-sex parents do have a slightly worse K through 12 GPA than their peers raised by opposite-sex parents. The graph shows children from same-sex parents received a K through 12 GPA of C's and B's and D's and C's respectively, which is slightly lower than the K through 12 GPA from those raised by a traditional mother and father, where over 30% of those that participated received B's and A's. However, the one participant who stated they received D's and F's came from a married female-male parental structure. Additionally, only 2 participants in the overall survey identified as being raised by same-sex parents, so the sample size in this study is way too small to make any declarative statement about K through 12 GPAs of those raised by same-sex parents. More research is needed.
How does foster kids' past traumas affect their academic success and their motivation to complete things? This would be our hypothesis number 3. As we can see in the graphs provided, there seems to be some correlation in the amount of parental involvement that these kids have in their lives that might impact their academic success. Now, if you take a foster kid who hasn't had that parental involvement in their life, then the chances of them having a harder time in school is pretty high, meaning that they might not achieve their academic goals due to no parental role.
Hypothesis 4. Children with parents who suffer from a substance use disorder, SUD, are more likely to perform worse academically than children who don't have parents with a substance use disorder. In our survey, participants were asked to rate themselves as a student. This rating was done on a Likert scale, starting with the lowest being 1, terrible, 2, poor, 3, average, 4, good, and 5, great. The participants were also asked if they had one or more parents with a substance use disorder. Using the data from these 2 questions, a simple bar graph was made to determine whether or not the hypothesis could be supported. The hypothesis states that children with parents who suffer from a substance use disorder are more likely to perform worse academically than children who don't. The bar graph has 2 columns. The column on the left represents the students who answered yes to having a parent who suffers from a substance use disorder. And the column on the right represents the students who answered no to having a parent who suffers from a substance use disorder. The bar graph shows the average performance rating by the participants in both categories. The students who answered yes to having a parent with an SUD had an average performance rating of 2. This was on the lower end of the scale, representing a poor performance rating. You can then see that the participants who answered no to having a parent with an SUD had an average performance rating of about a 4. This was on the higher end of the scale, representing a good performance rating. Now taking a look on the error bars that are on the columns yes and no, you'll notice that they don't overlap. This shows that there's a significant difference in the academic performance of the participants who did have a parent with a substance use disorder compared to the participants who did not have a parent with a substance use disorder. Ultimately, this tells us that children with parents who suffer from a substance use disorder are generally more likely to perform worse academically than children who don't have parents with a substance use disorder. Therefore, the hypothesis is supported.
In conclusion, research has proven for decades that being raised in a traditional family has a significant impact on an individual's overall success. The research data gathered during the study has proven that children that are raised in a conventional household overall perform better than their peers who are raised in an unconventional household. Our data gathered proved that children who experience their parents getting divorced do have an academic decline. Children with same-sex parents have a lower GPA. Children raised in foster homes have a lower rate of parental involvement, leading to an impact on their academic success. And children raised in a household with substance abuse have a lower GPA than those who were not raised in that environment.
Although we were able to come to an overall conclusion, there were a few shortcomings and limitations within our research. Some of those being a small sample size, sample bias with willing survey participants, personal information requirements, dishonest answers, too many different classifications or classifications that were too broad, confusing or unclear questions, as well as some of the questions not getting answered, and last but not least, cost.
For our future directions, we want to be able to make more of a narrow focus on a particular parental structure and or familial disruptions. And we also want to have a larger sample size. We also want to have more clear and concise survey questions. And in order for us to have a more broad survey, we want to be able to offer incentives in order to get more hesitant people to participate. We also want to be able to study the impacts and traumas that might impact academic success in an individual. And we want to study how having a single parent household or not having a parental role in these kids' lives can also have an impact on their success not only academic but just in general.